Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Welcome to my channel, I Hate Rock Music. And I'm going to brag a little bit. I live in Seattle, and I've lived here in Seattle. I was born here, but I've lived here constantly from 1976 until now. And I basically got to grow up in the Seattle early punk scene, and then through the 80s into the really serious punk scene here in Seattle. And then, of course, the birth of grunge. And a lot of those guys were my friends. And so I was in one of the bands that didn't make it, Chubby Children. But I'm going to talk about Nirvana, and I'm going to brag a little bit because, yep, I saw Nirvana 20 times. I'm a lucky man indeed. And the first time I heard about them, I remember sitting in my room up on Capitol Hill, and on the radio, I heard the song Paper Cuts. And they were playing Nirvana's demo tape. They didn't have anything out. Hardly anybody knew who they were. And I heard it, and I couldn't even believe what I was hearing. It struck me right away that it was one of the greatest things I'd ever heard. And that wasn't even as good as they get. And so I started hearing some of their material on the radio, and it was pretty psyched. And then the Love Buzz single came out, and I went apeshit because not only were they heavy, but they could do a pretty decent pop song, as it were. And the flip side, Big Cheese, totally blew my mind. And I actually called Kurt Cobain up because they had a music magazine in Seattle called the Rocket, and there was a bunch of bands and then their phone numbers, and Nirvana was in there. So I called him up, and sure enough, Kurt answered the phone, and I just said, "Hey, I love your music. I think you're one of the greatest bands I've ever heard." And he laughed and said that was great, and that was pretty much the conversation. I told him that I played music too, and he said maybe we'll bump into each other sometime. But anyway, I would bump into him a couple more times over the years. But let me go through this list. The first time I saw him was in April 1988 at the Central Tavern, and to say that I saw him at that show is kind of misleading because when I got there wasn't hardly anybody there, 10 or 20 people, if that. And I'm not even sure if they ended up playing. I waited around, and no band played. And so I finally left. So I hope they didn't play an amazing show that night. So then the second time I saw them was at the Vogue in April 1988. And I ended up seeing them at the Vogue a bunch of times. And that was a really hip club here in Seattle at the time. And you could always go there and see a lot of great bands, particularly local bands. So I saw them again at the Vogue in July of 1988. And so I ended up seeing them every time I could, and I was never disappointed. Then fourth time I saw them was at Squid Row in July 1988, playing with Skin Yard. And then fifth time I saw them was at the Union Station, restored train station here in Seattle, October 1988, with the Butthole Surfers. And of course, most people are there to see the Butthole Surfers. I was there to see Nirvana. And then the sixth time I saw him was at the Underground, which used to be called the Hall of Fame. And that was in December of 1988, playing with DOA, which was a great double bill. And then the seventh time I saw him was again at the Underground in December '88 for the Sub Pop 200 party. And that was crazy because by then word had been getting out in the local scene. And there was a lot of people there to see a bunch of Sub Pop bands, but people there. Nirvana was obviously building up a pretty good following, and they got a great reception. So the eighth time I saw him was at the University of Washington Hub in February of 1989, again with Skin Yard. And the ninth time I saw him was at the Annex in April of 1989. That was an interesting one because it's a little dance studio above a 7-Eleven on 3rd Avenue. And Love Battery premiered that night. It was the first time they played. And I really loved Love Battery too, and Nirvana was awesome, but there was probably only 50 people there, and I had to laugh because Kurt and the band pretty much destroyed their equipment, even though there was only about 50 people there, and I was friends with Jonathan Poneman of Sub Pop Records, and I went up to him and I told him that I thought Nirvana was the greatest band in the world and that Sub Pop was the coolest thing going, and so he thanked me for that. But pretty much by that point, they were my favorite band in the world. I loved them. I thought they were destined for greatness. And then the 10th time I saw them was the Vogue in April of 1989 with the Flaming Lips. And Flaming Lips put on a pretty good show too, but Nirvana barely fit on the stage because they added Jason Everman on second guitar, and you couldn't cut the air with a knife. They were just so heavy, and one of my favorite times I've seen them. And then the 11th time I saw him was at the Hub Ballroom in January 1990. I think Tad played at that show, and I remember talking a friend of mine into going down to see him. I was like, man, you got to see this band Nirvana. And we went to the show, and I actually felt like Nirvana had a bad night. I was disappointed. My friend didn't see them at their best. And Tad, of course, was totally professional and full on like they always were. But now that I go back and listen to the bootlegs of that show at the Hub, they sound fine. It just wasn't that as impressive as they usually were at that show for me. And then the Mac Daddy was the 12th time I saw him at the Moore Theater for the Lame Fest, and that was August 24th, 1990. So it was my birthday, and I'm going to see Nirvana at the Moore Theater, the biggest venue I'd seen him at, and so they were super loud. And Mudhoney had just gotten back from their European tour, and they were incredible. I wasn't that big a fan of Mudhoney up to that point. Their records were okay, but seeing them live just blew me away. They were obviously a finely tuned machine by the time they hit the stage at the Moore. And also, I bought the Nirvana T-shirt at that show, and I got the copy of Bleach at that show. And I regret that I couldn't go into the mosh pit because I had to carry around that record. But an amazing show. Then the 13th time I saw him was at the Motorsports Arena, this outdoor arena downtown, and that was September 1990. And boy, they really tore it up at that show. I still have scars on my head from people diving off the stage and clobbering me right in the head. The show isn't spoken of that well, but I thought it was great, and definitely got to mosh at that one. Then the big one, the 14th time I saw him was at the Paramount in October 1991, and of course that was great, seeing him at a proper venue, playing super loud for a packed house. It was incredible. And in September 1991 as well, I saw them, so that would be in between the 13th and 14th time I saw him. I went to the record release party at the Rebar. I got a special invitation for the record release party for Nevermind. And the band didn't play, but I got to hang out with the band a lot. Chris Novoselic and I actually got in a food fight and got booted out. And it was snowing that night, and we went out to his car and smoked a bunch of weed. And Kurt didn't look that happy that night. There's a famous picture of him crouched in front of a photo booth with his head in his hands, and I don't think he was enjoying that party that much. So got to see him like that a few times, but generally super nice guy. And so then April of 1991, I saw him at the OK Hotel, the famous show. I'll post a video of that below because I worked till about 11 or so that night, and I heard about this secret unannounced show at the OK Hotel. So me and my buddy rushed down there, and the place was full. It only held about 400, and I think about 700 people showed up. And the doorman was basically taking people down the street, taking cash and pocketing it, and then letting us in. And when I got in there, it was just pure mayhem. The ceiling was too low for stage divers and crowd surfers, but they were doing it anyway. And of course, they premiered their brand new song, "Smells Like Teen Spirit," that show. But when Dave Grohl was drumming, it was insane. One of the wildest nights ever. And then the 15th time I saw him was at the Off Ramp in November of 1991, and another great show. And then there was another secret show. The 16th time I saw him was at the Crocodile Cafe, and they were billed as Pencap Chew. But of course, all us hardcore Nirvana fans knew who it was, and it was a great show. And then the 17th time I saw him was at the King Theater in August of 1993, the Mia Zapata benefit. Once again, that was a great place to see him because the King Theater was a converted movie theater. with a big stage, and they really packed a wallop, and there was a lot of people there for the benefit. So really great crowd, insanely great show. And then the 18th time I saw him was at the arena in January 1994, and that was the last time I saw him. I didn't see the Live and Loud show at the Pier because by that time, of course, they were a big deal. But the arena show was a great way to finish out all my years of seeing Nirvana, seeing them play in an arena, a giant show, just super fucking loud. And they completely delivered as they always did, and it was magnificent. And so, and, you know, obviously it wasn't soon after that that Kurt died, and it was all over, and a really sad day for everyone in the world, and particularly us in Seattle. But it was a great ride. I love buying every one of their singles when they came out, and buying their albums, and I just loved them. I still love them, and the early stuff is still dear to my heart because that's when I first discovered them. So I still go back to Bleach more often than not. It doesn't get played as much, and but I knew right away they were the greatest rock band in the world, and they proved that to be true. So I guess my insights were valid. And I became a huge Nirvana collector as well. So I amassed all the import versions, bootlegs, test pressings, posters, T-shirts, everything I could get because I was hardcore, and I've always been a vinyl junkie. So it was a no-brainer to collect all their stuff. But it's funny now looking back, like all the posters for their shows were all over town on telephone poles, and I could have retired if I'd collected all the Nirvana posters that were just free hanging on telephone poles all over Seattle. I could have pulled them down, but you know, when they're a local band, you don't really think about it. They're friends of yours. They're just a local band. You're having a good time, and but I would have loved to have snagged all those posters. But anyway, there, I'm finished bragging now. Yep, I saw Nirvana 20 times, and I think I'm probably one of the luckiest people in the world. Maybe the only other people that saw Nirvana 20 times are people that travel around the globe and followed them, and then the band themselves, because even in Seattle, I'm not sure how many people went and saw them every time they played. So, yeah, 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 yeah. I shouldn't be bragging, but I have to. Nirvana, holy fucking shit. A hometown band. I couldn't have been born in a better city to be here to see all that from the beginning to the end. I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for watching I Hate Rock Music.